What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to part 3 of my divisional previews. We are on to the Central today. The West is by far the spicier half of the NHL, at least for my predictions. I'm sure there are some folks that have some hot takes for the East, but for me, it's pretty much all in the West. So we're going to get started with one pretty much right off the jump. I do not have the Chicago Blackhawks in 8th in this division. I actually have the Nashville Predators. So hear me out at least. This team finished with 68 points last season. A lot of very, very bad seasons from a lot of players. That being said, the issue that a lot of people had with Nashville's offseason last year, they brought in a lot of big names, but all guys over 30. Marchessault, Stamkos, Brady Shea, that were coming off of pretty good or career years in the case of Brady Shea. And they've not done much really to address that, which is probably long term the correct decision for them to make. However, looking at this group of players, it doesn't really give me the impression that we should expect them to be improving, at least not much from that season. I don't know that I would expect them to be at 68 points again. That was pretty extreme, but I don't know that I expect them to get much closer. They didn't make a lot of crazy moves in the offseason. Again, bring in Haula, Haig, and Perbix, ship out Sissons and Lozon. So this is kind of what we have. It's a better top 6, I think, than Chicago. And don't get me wrong, this is kind of a gamble for me, putting Chicago above these guys, because I think from a talent perspective, these guys should still have them beat. I just don't know how this team is going to be able to rebound from what happened last year. And frankly, outside of Roman Yossi, I really do not like this defense core anymore. It's so funny because for Nashville, that was one of, if not their biggest strength for such a long time. And now it's like you have Roman Yossi and some other guys. I don't think it's that good. And then, of course, in net, you still have UC Saros. You have Eustace Sandin, and still as the backup, he was not great for them. There's worse backups out there, but I think for a younger goalie who still has, maybe some potential left in him, I think he's kind of running out of runway to make a name for himself in the league. And UC Saros has always been a bit of a workhorse, but coming off of a rough season by his standards last year, it probably wouldn't be the worst thing to be able to shift the load away from him a bit. So I don't think they're going to be able to do that this season either. He could, of course, start hot, remain hot, and then maybe having to stay on him for 60 to 64 games is not the worst thing, but I just don't know that I expect this team to make much relative improvement. Again, I'd be surprised if they finish with 68 or fewer points again, but I don't think they're going to be making a significant, 10 plus point jump in the standings. So that's my take on Nashville. They obviously still have some names here. Philip Forsberg's still a very good player. There's still some competent players here, but all of their top guys are on the wrong side of 30, and I don't know that I can expect them to make real big bounces back from what they showed us last year. So yeah, Nashville at 8. I fully expect that to blow up in my face, by the way. I cannot for the life of me put this division and the West in general in the same order I did last year. So we're throwing some hot takes in there. At number 7, again, I have Chicago. I'm not going completely crazy. I don't think they will be pushing for a playoff spot, but I actually really like where this team's going. I like that they're not afraid to just let everything kind of happen from within. They obviously have made some moves over the last couple seasons, but by and large, they are letting this team that is a very, very young team just grow from within. And I like that a lot. And we've seen a bit of that. Obviously, Bedard struggled last year, but the likes of Frank Nazar had a very good season last season. We saw a bit of a coming out party, really, from Alex Vlasic. Wyatt Kaiser had a pretty solid season, I thought, as well. And then, really, this entire defense core is like almost obnoxiously young, sparing Connor Murphy. And this is all without Kevin Korchinski in here. So he could very well find his way back onto this roster at some point as well. And again, obnoxiously young. But this team just doing a lot of kind of leaning on their growth internally. And I think it's a painful approach. Like, you have to go through the years that Chicago's gone through, but I don't think it's the worst one. And I think it's going to pay off for them in spades when they finally get to the point that they're making the playoffs consistently, because this team's probably going to have a lot of chemistry. They're going to have a lot of familiarity with the way they want to be playing their game. And I think in the long term, it will probably pay off for them. But I don't know that it's going to be enough this season for them to make like a 30 some point jump and make the playoffs. I do think they will improve. They will probably maybe break the 70-point mark. And I think if they do that, it will be enough to get them past Nashville. I don't think Nashville's going to be making much improvement from their last season. So Chicago at 7 for me. Again, get the pitchforks out now because it just gets weirder from here in the West. At number 6, one of the mushier middles of any of the divisions in the NHL this year is the Central, and it was really hard to see where I wanted to put these teams from a bias perspective versus where I think they're actually going to go looking at them objectively. So at 6, I don't want them to finish here, but I do have Utah. Utah, for me, they made kind of the big swing at getting JJ Peterka, and looking at their forward group, it's a better forward group. But I don't know that adding this piece to this top 6 suddenly makes them a playoff team, and I think what they lost on defense actually makes them worse. I know Michael Kesselring's not like a number 1 pair defenseman, but I think if you're looking at it at a one-for-one perspective, swapping out Kesselring for Schmidt is not an upgrade. And this was a defense group that was solid but wasn't great already, and obviously I don't think it's getting better. So I just don't know how much that does for them on the team level, right? They also lose Michelli and Bukestad and Josh Stone, who was not a major piece of this team previously. But you can look at this bottom 6. It's not sexy. It's not flashy. They're gonna get the job done, or at least try to. But I think they're going to have some matchup problems, especially with some other teams in the Central specifically. When it comes to these 2 lines are off. One of these 2 lines is on, and they're matched up against a Dallas third line or a Colorado third line or a Winnipeg third line or, something like that. So I just don't think they quite have what it takes to get there. Again, I would love to see them get there. I think it would be exciting. I think it would be good for hockey, but I just don't know that they're there yet. Their goaltending, Karel Vejmelka, Vitek Vanacek. I don't think Vejmelka is in a position where he can be playing 55, 60 games and doing it well. Vitek Vanacek has moments where he can play pretty well, but we haven't seen that from him consistently in a couple of years, so I just don't know that I have the expectation that this team's going to find a way in unless they dramatically wow, I'm totally losing my words here. Unless they perform much better than their expectation. So we'll see what happens here. Again, I would love to see this team do well. I just don't quite think they're going to have it in them. At number, 6? At number 5, again, I struggled a lot with where to place these middle teams. I do have Minnesota, another team I want to see doing well, but I just don't quite think they have it. I think St. Louis, who I have ahead of them, is just a little bit better. And I'll kind of go through it piece by piece here, right? So if you're looking at, all right, who has the straight-up best player? Kirill Kaprizov is one of the best players in the division, frankly. He's probably second behind, or third, I guess, behind McKinnon and Makar. He is unbelievable. But if you look at the back half of this 4 group, and really even like some of the pieces in their top 6, it just doesn't do a lot for me. They didn't make any crazy offseason moves. They bring in Tarasenko and Sturm. They offload Nyquist and Kudrow, so it's not, again, anything really material, but Tarasenko is well past the point of playing a top 6 role, I think. Nico Sturm is not a bad 4th-line center, but this team just as a whole is not going to be able to do a ton offensively, I don't think, outside of this first line and their power play. I think these first 5 names are great, and I think this is a great building block. Zuccarello, obviously on the downside of his career, but these 4 specifically are a great core to build from. I just don't think they have the pieces surrounding them to be able to get it done on offense. Their defense group is actually pretty interesting. Specifically, Faber and Buyam are 2 really exciting young pieces to watch. They will have... Who's missing here? Yes, Brodin. Back, we don't know exactly when his return's expected to be, but he will slot in here probably for Bogosian. They might kind of swap out this bottom pair, right? But there's a pretty solid defensive group, I think. It's just not at an elite level. I think by the end of the season, depending on the growth of these 2 in particular, it could be. But we saw how health bit Minnesota last year, and if it does that really in any of their top players this year, I think they're going to be in a similar situation, especially if it's Kaprizov, where they just find themselves in the middle of the pack and aren't able to make up enough of that ground. And then if they're all healthy, when you compare this team to the other teams ahead of them, I just don't quite think they have the match. The other thing we have to consider is that it's going to be really Gustafson's first full year. I mean, he was the starter last year. I don't think anyone was questioning that, but now that Fleury's out of the mix, he is well and truly the starting goalie of this team. He will have to play probably 50 plus games if this team wants to make the playoffs, because Wallstead, while he's been solid in the AHL, has not necessarily lived up to the expectations that we had when he was drafted a few years back. So that could, of course, change, but for now, they're definitely going to rely on Gustafsson the most they have during his tenure as a member of the Wild, and we'll see whether that ends up biting them or being a good thing. So yeah, that's it for Minnesota. Another really interesting team to watch, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them make some kind of splash at the deadline this year, now that they have some more cap space, but kind of questionable that they didn't do more in the offseason, considering that newly found freedom, if you want to call it that. At number 4, I also wanted to put this team higher, and we'll talk about the team that I have above them that I wanted to put lower, but I do have St. Louis. This group is I think sneaky good. This top 6 is pretty solid. A full season of Jimmy Snuggerud is going to be really fun to watch, and their bottom 6 is actually pretty strong too, considering the roles that they're going to have to play. I love their center depth. These 4 guys, again, while no one really pops off the table aside from Robert Thomas, this is a good group of centers, and this is a big physical team that is going to play well in the playoffs, and we saw that against Winnipeg, pushing them to Game 7, being a second and a half away from moving on to the second round. Their defense is still where the questions lie, for me at least. Fowler and Parayko as a top pair is probably not exactly where you want to be. While Cam Fowler was very, very good for them last year, they are still feeling the absence of Torrey Krug, and I don't think the expectation is that he's coming back. His NHL career is likely over, which stinks. He only played 700 and some games, but this team will rely on seeing improvements again from the likes of Broberg, Mayu, if he's actually going to have a full-time role on this team, and Tyler Tucker. If that happens, and this is not a black hole defense group, this team could be very good. If not, they're going to struggle, and they're going to rely on Jordan Binnington, which they will do anyway. The issue with that, if you want to call it that, is that we've seen the, again, ranges of what Binnington can be when he's on and when he's off his game. We saw that really in different sections last year. He didn't start the year all that well. He goes to the Four Nations tournament. He basically wins Canada the tournament. And then from there on out, he has a pretty good end to the season. Does all right in the playoffs, had some moments that he probably wants back, but by and large, a pretty good season, especially in the back half from Jordan Binnington. Joel Hofer, one of the better young backups in the league, and I think he will probably continue to see more of the game share for St. Louis. And I think they're probably okay with that. Jordan Binnington, by no means old, but good to have a guy who's on the younger side as your backup that you can mentor, kind of coach up, that's going to be a strong contributor for your team versus, I'll take the example of Utah, not that Vanacek can't contribute there, but I think St. Louis is much more comfortable with their backup goalie situation for a guy that you probably don't want playing 60 games than a team like Utah is. So all in all, I actually really like the St. Louis team. I almost wanted to put them higher, but I thought the Chicago take was probably enough spice for this video. So I didn't drop Winnipeg too far, but I do have them at number 3. The loss of Nikolai Ehlers is a pretty big one. I don't think it breaks this team by any means. They also lose Mason Appleton and Brandon Tanev. They bring in, of course, Nyquist, Tanner Pearson, and Jonathan Toews. That is where I have a little bit of concern for this team. Center depth was not their strength last year, and now they're relying on a guy that has not played professional hockey in 4 seasons, to be a second-line center on a team that they have strong playoff expectations for. Was a President's Trophy winner last year. It might be tough for him to properly fill that void. It would be really cool if he did, obviously going back to his hometown, kind of trying to keep them in the mix in the playoffs and go on a deep run, hopefully, but I don't know how much I like it. But in looking at these rosters, I couldn't, within reason, put these guys any lower than 3rd. Their defense group is actually pretty good as well. We saw this for a good chunk of the season last year, guys like Morrissey, like Sandberg, like Pionk, all having really good stretches. Um, and then, of course, in net, you have probably the best goaltender in the world in Connor Hellebuck, as well as a pretty good backup in Eric Comrie. I didn't even mention Adam Lowry, but he listed as out now. He's not going to miss the entirety of the season or anything like that, or a big chunk of it like we're expecting Kachuk to. But these two guys are probably the best goalie tandem in the NHL. Obviously, a lot of that is weighted on Connor Hellebuck. He is pushing or at 60 games every season. He's very, very good in the regular season. He will be the number one goalie taken off of all of your fantasy boards, etc., etc., etc. What is he going to do in the playoffs? These guys are almost to the point now where they are the Maple Leafs of the Western Conference. Edmonton is still, I think, there, but these guys are a close second because they've had opportunities and have not done enough with them. Does this new look get them there? I don't know. It definitely looks better when Lowry's in the lineup here than it does without it. But even with him in the lineup, I think the top nine is pretty good. This bottom line could do with or without it. And then, of course, their strength lies on their back end when they're all healthy and Connor Hellebuck is on his game. So maybe a bit of a surprise to see Winnipeg this low, but I think a lot of people probably have the two teams that I have at 1 and 2 at 1 and 2 as well. And for me, I have Colorado at 2. This team will be pretty interesting to watch just because they're seeing the resurgence of hopefully a couple of guys here. I'll actually start with Valeri Nichushkin, who for the last couple of seasons has not been able to be a regular part of this team due to various personal reasons. So hopefully this year he can kind of get that in line and not be part of the problem there. And then, of course, Gabe Landeskog, who came back for the playoffs. It'll be very interesting to see what he looks like in a full season if he plays that or even close to it of regular season games for the Avs. Obviously, if he can and he's, playing around what he was in the playoffs, he's probably a, 50-point guy, give or take. The last time he played a full regular season, I think he was above a point per game, and that was back when they won the Cup. So I don't think he's going to be that guy. I don't think he's going to be a fourth liner. He's probably going to fall somewhere in between. But I think if he can stay healthy, this team obviously looks dramatically different with him in the lineup, assuming he's on his game, than they do without it. Same for Valeri Nichushkin. If you're bumping each of these wing pairs up a line, it's a much different looking Colorado Avalanche team and a much less scary looking Colorado Avalanche team. With them, there's an argument for this team to be the best in the Central and maybe a President's Trophy contender. So obviously still have McKinnon, Lehkonen, a full season of Marty Necas. Again, Brock Nelson, Landeskog, Nichushkin. Again, if this line sticks for the full season, obviously it's the first time we've seen a full season of this line, but it just completely changes the identity of this team. So we'll see what happens there. It'll be very interesting to watch this team and see what a full year of a team that had a ton of turnover last year looks like. But I think they'll be pretty good on defense. Not a lot's changing. They bring in Brett Burns. He's going to play probably maybe not even a second line power play role. They have really three guys ahead of them that probably could do it better. But will be in a much reduced role, which is probably good for him at this point in his career. Otherwise, the core of this is still the same strong group that we've seen in the past for Colorado. And then, of course, a full season, as I mentioned, of Mackenzie Blackwood and Scott Wedgwood will be good for them and hopefully better than the start they had last year with Mr. Alexander Georgiev. So all in all, I'm pretty confident in this Avs team. I think they, again, very well could have an argument for the first spot in this division. I just think that Dallas has a slight edge over them, and I'll jump over to them now. Still a ridiculously deep forward group. I actually think the Avs could have an argument to make for being deeper than them at forward, assuming all of those guys are healthy and playing to their potential. But most likely, I think this Dallas team is going to have a better forward group than the Avs as a whole. Obviously, the top-end talent, the Avs probably have the edge with McKinnon, but this is a ridiculous first line, ridiculous second line, ridiculous third line when they're all healthy and at their game. And then, frankly, this is a pretty good fourth line as well. But the wealth is spread for this Dallas team. They are going to be very good. The issue for them is going to be on defense, not dissimilar from last year. A really, really good year from Thomas Harley. If he continues on that trajectory that he was on last year, this team is going to be in a much better spot than they might have expected themselves to be on defense. The question still kind of lies on this right side, and they actually have Heiskanen listed as a right side defenseman instead of left because Lon Bichel actually had a really good playoff for them and is probably deserving of this role as a full-time NHLer for the Stars. So We'll see who plays on their offhand. Heiskanen's probably best suited to do that. But these two guys on the right side are still where the biggest issue lies for Dallas, and we'll see if they do anything to address it. Obviously, their cap situation a little bit tighter now that they have to fit the pockets of Mikko Rantanen, but nonetheless, I think they're probably pretty happy with where they're sitting from that perspective. And in net, maybe the second best, third best tandem in the league, these two, Jake Ottinger and Casey DeSmith. Jake Ottinger, of course, is going to get the majority of the game share. Casey DeSmith had some moments that he was not so great, but by and large was a very capable backup for this Dallas team, and I would expect that to be the case again next year. So let me know what you think of the Central Division. Again, this one was a little bit more filled with takes that people probably aren't going to agree with, but let me know whether you think your team is too high or too low. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe as well. It is free, and I will talk to you guys to wrap up this series with the Pacific.